All right, good morning everyone and welcome to our monthly Q&A. I'm Laura Axelson, of course, and with us here is someone who has been reporting a very long time and still obviously loves it because he's not retiring anytime soon that we can see. He's been freelance, he works in court, he's captioned, he's been a speaker, he founded a school and has taught at the school. He started doing computer transcripts, computer CAT software in '79 and was a forerunner in the real time. He's been a court reporting ambassador to China, and he also enjoys billiards, I see from his 14-page curriculum vitae. This is definitely someone you guys want to just keep in touch with. He's got so many things going on and is definitely, I consider, steno royalty. So Dom Tursi, welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you so much for agreeing to talk with us today.
Thank you, Laura, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your day to let me come in and share a couple of things with you. Laura has asked me to give you a couple of ideas in terms of what kind of reporting I've done. As I mentioned to her, I'm always uncomfortable speaking about myself, but I'm a lot more comfortable speaking about the career and things such as that. So let me tell you that I think I'm starting now my 57th year in the reporting field, and generally speaking, I've spent 20 years in the state court system, always in the state of New York. I spent about 16 years in the freelance arena, and this, I believe I'm beginning my 21st year in the federal court. Federal court is kind of a busy place, at least ours is. We're part of the Eastern District of New York, and that consists of a courthouse in Brooklyn and the one that I work in, which is in Long Island, a place called Central Islip. And right now in our Brooklyn courthouse, we have underway the trial, which has received a lot of publicity, of El Chapo. So my colleagues in Brooklyn are working on that trial. We've just begun a trial here, which is actually the second trial because the first was a mistrial. It's a trial of you might consider it political corruption in one of the two counties of Long Island. Anyway, that's to bring you up to date on what's happening today. As far as my own career, I guess I started around 1962, and New York State, New York City, has always had departments, and many of those departments hired reporters. For example, the Transit Authority was one of the first places that I worked, and that consisted of people getting hurt on the subway steps and other places and coming in and having hearings. They had examiners who would ask questions, probably an hour to an hour and a half long, and so I got some great grooming there. From there, I went to the Department of Investigation of the City of New York, and that's a place where where attorneys and of course law enforcement are investigating other departments of the city. And so we took a lot of testimony there. From there, I went into the court system, but my first court job was actually not in New York at all. It was in Connecticut. And it was a very interesting court in terms of reporting, because in one courtroom they would have civil, criminal calendar calls, they would have pleas, they would have trials. So it was really a terrific background to reporting. That all predated my going into my first long career of working as an official court reporter in the courts of New York State. New York State, they have a lower court and a higher court. We have several divisions of courts. In Long Island, we had what was called the district court, and once again, it was great for grooming. With a little bit of background, it really helped me an awful lot, because going into that court, we did a variety of cases, from small claims cases through lengthy trials. The jurisdiction was less than that of the Supreme Court, that is the Superior Court generally. In New York State, we call the Superior Court the Supreme Court. And after a number of years in the lower courts, I did take a test and pass it. In New York State, all courts are civil service, and so subject to an examination. I passed that. I went on into the Supreme Court, where I was really fortunate to have shared an office with one of my generation's legends, Arnold Cohen. His twin brother, Bill Cohen, was both in state court and then moved over to federal. So I learned an awful lot, both from going through various phases of reporting and from the people who I was fortunate to rub shoulders with. I spent a total of 20 years in the state court, and at that point, I felt that I could not get any more out of it, and I needed something else that was challenging. So a friend of mine had a reporting firm, a freelance firm in New York City, and he was just going on computer. I'd already been on computer for about 4 years before this point. I was one of the early people in New York, or at least in the East Coast, working with computer systems. So this friend of mine said, look, I've got a case going on. It's in DC, but I understand that you have 6 weeks vacation. Yeah, in those days, the state of New York gave us 6 weeks of vacation. I very rarely took advantage of that. But in this case, I was curious. I didn't know very much about high-level freelance work. So he asked if I would go to DC. I did. And there were 2 of us working there, 2 reporters. And he hadn't told me in advance that this was a case that was probably the largest bankruptcy in the country. It was the Penn Central Railroad bankruptcy case. You might look that up and get some information on it. Anyway, here's my first exposure to really good freelance. I walked in the room. It was filled with attorneys. There couldn't have been less than 15, possibly 20 attorneys in the room. And in those days, most of the attorneys were male. Not a big deal. But I find that I'm going into a continued witness. The witness had been on the stand, had been testifying in a deposition for, I think, 10 days. So now I walk in on a Monday morning, and of course I'm there nice and early, bright and early. I get in there and I set up my machine. I know that there's a continued witness, but here's something that I heard that really knocked me off my feet. Good morning, Mr. Reporter. What happened to Linda with the good-looking legs? And I said, oh, I'm in for it now. So these attorneys, they became a family, and they love to tease. So I started teasing them back, but not too frequently. Anyway, this was my first foray, as they say, into serious freelance reporting. That witness, I think, went another 2 weeks, always daily copy. And again, early days of computer, probably in the early to mid 1980s. I was, I think, one of about 5 or 10 people in the Northeast, and couldn't have been more than 30, 40 people in the entire East Coast who was using a computer to transcribe. If I'm boring you, just let me know. I'm trying to keep you guys awake as much as I possibly can. And I don't mind people poking fun of me. That's just what makes my day.
Let me just pop in here and say, if you have any questions about any of this, you can go ahead and type them in the chat and I will pass them along.
Great, thank you, Laura. Let me just go on to, I went into the Supreme Court in 1974, and that was a pretty busy court. You know, things, in terms of litigation, things seem to go in cycles. I've been doing this long enough to realize that. So, for example, my early days in the Supreme Court, our high court, many of our cases were matrimonial. We had a number of trials that were on mats. We also did a lot of negligence situations, car accidents and the like. And then all of a sudden things turned, and there were medical malpractice cases. And those are the big cases that eventuated into trials. And again, in those days, we didn't have the opportunity of, most of the reporters that is, didn't have the opportunity of a computer where you could simply print up a rough draft. So we read from our steno notes. And I remember those were days also where they would keep the jury until 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, probably sequester them overnight in a hotel. So I remember reading back at 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night for hours sometimes at a time. Anyway, that's where I really learned to look at my notes. At the same time, I owned a school. I opened it, I think, in 1969, and it continued for about 10 years. And so whatever experiences I encountered in the courtroom, I would bring to my classes. I instructed the high-level class, and we had a day and evening school. I think at one point we had an enrollment of maybe 300 students. I don't think that exists anymore. But we were very fortunate. We trained a lot of good people. And again, I used a lot of my experiences in the courtroom to teach my students. As I say, I got bored after 20 years in the state and moved on then to freelance. My freelance career lasted about 16 years. My first couple of years was working for this good buddy of mine and following the Penn Central bankruptcy. Did a number of high-profile cases, a number of cases, of course, that were not so high-profile. It was a company where we had scopists, so I would go out and work for an entire day, and when I got back to the office, I had a draft transcript to proofread. That was our routine in those days and in that office. After a couple of years, I decided to open my own firm. It was called Tursi International. And I wound up, I wanted to keep it a small firm. I did not want to make it as large as potentially it could have been. So I wound up with just a couple of reporters working for me, did a lot of high profile things, but most significant to me, most fun to me, was reporting outside of my own area. So I wound up reporting in places like the Philippines, Hong Kong many times, as far on the other way as, I guess, Cairo, Turkey, and many times in London. And again, especially for you students out there or young reporters, my career led me to realize that you've always got to be prepared for the unexpected. So when I went to places far away, I started realizing that, I may not have to get the transcript out right now, but I'm sure they're going to want this transcript soon after we return to the States. Pardon me. And then after a while, that became, some of these attorneys actually want a transcript now on site. And so again, early days of computer, I actually, in the early days, two quick stories that are fun for me. One was I had no printer, no access to a printer. I think I was in London at this point when somebody at the end of the day said, I really need this transcript tonight. And our modus operandi at the time was not to give a digital form of transcript, but a hard copy. And so I had to figure out how I can give them a hard copy without a way of giving them hard copy. And so I called the hotel that I was staying at, and they said, hey, why don't you just send it to our fax machine? We'll be happy to print it on our fax machine. And that's what they did. And so they implemented, 200 pages on a fax machine was not fun in those days, but they were very accommodating because the attorneys were big clients of theirs. Anyway, that's some of my early days. The other thing that I wanted to share with you about the early days of reporting. As I said, I was around the world and I was early in the days of computer. Just before my first major set of depositions in Hong Kong, Stenograph announced that it had just put on the market for sale something called a modem. Had no idea what that was in those days. For those of you who are not familiar, modem, it's an acronym which has to do with transmitting data from one place to another by way of a telephone. So I heard that they came out with that and I ordered one. I didn't realize it was going to cost $1,000 or maybe even more than that. I think it was worth about $25 in those days. But this was proprietary. This is the only thing that a reporter could use. We couldn't use anything off the shelf. So I bought that modem. And I went to Hong Kong about 4 days earlier than the first day designated for the deposition. The reason was obvious. I had to see if I could get this modem working so that the first day on the job, if they asked for immediate or daily copy, I could accommodate them. Well, I ultimately was able to get it working with the help of a local. Of course, this is Hong Kong. In those days, one of the main centers for computerization. So they got it working for me, and every night I would send my data back to New York where I had a scopist working on it. And there was no need to bring it back to Hong Kong because nobody was ordering the transcript until Monday of week 2. When the taking attorney, turned to me and said, by the way, Dom, how quickly can we get the transcript from last week? And without a blink, I responded, how about tomorrow? To say that he was impressed is underestimating what was said by a long shot. And so the only problem that I had was I could get the data to New York, but in those days, again, with proprietary software, had no way of getting it back to Hong Kong. So I'd mentioned that to him and he said, oh, don't worry, I've got a New York office. You have your office, get the hard copy to my office, and they will get it to me by fax. 250 pages a day by fax. That was his problem. It wasn't mine, thank goodness. And so for the next 5 weeks, it was a total of 6 weeks, that's how he got his transcript. So always be, for you students, always try to be prepared for the unexpected, anticipate the worst, try to accommodate your client as much as you can without sacrificing ethics, and just go out of your way. And let me tell you, you'll have clients for life. The other side of that case is a story that I just would like to share with you. The other attorney, of course, I hadn't known. He was also from New York. And he, in the beginning of the second week, turned to me and said, Dom, I see that my adversary is getting transcripts. Can I? I said, absolutely. He said, how much will it cost me? I said, for you, I will not charge 5 cents more than I'm charging your adversary. Working reporters, I think you know what that means. Of course, I had a captive audience. That doesn't come around very often. And he had no problem with it. In fact, he became a lifelong client. And when I left the freelance arena, what is that, about 21 years ago? I hadn't seen him very often after that, but he came into my courthouse here on Long Island about 3 years ago and walked up to me and recognized me and said hello, and we started reminiscing right there in the courtroom. Anyway, you can really make an impression on people if you go out of your way and you accommodate.
I'm just going to interrupt here and say, after hearing you talk for these past 15 minutes, it is so obvious that you love and have loved your career, and just enjoy every kind of thing you can do with it. What kind of advice would you have for the rest of us about how to stay in love with this career as you have done?
You know, Lauren, that's a great question. Everybody is different. I certainly don't expect that everybody who starts this course wants to achieve wants to strive to get to the highest levels of the business. That's not even necessary, but always striving to improve, striving to be the best you can be, striving for transcripts that are as accurate as possible is number one. Realize that our profession is one of the oldest on the planet. Shorthand was invented by Cicero. Yes, that Cicero, because he was one of the senators in the Roman Senate at the time that they were developing the governmental structure. And he thought that not only the results would be important to future generations, but also the deliberations might be important to other governments trying to develop themselves. And in fact, when the US government was being structured, they turned an awful lot to the written transcripts, which are published in books, of what happened in the Roman Senate. They actually weren't transcripts, they were just books that were written on it based upon the transcripts. But he thought it was so important that he invented shorthand so that somebody would preserve the deliberations of the Senate. And that is one of the reasons why the US governmental structure is so closely aligned in many ways with what happened in the Roman Senate in about 64 AD. So I wanted to share that with you. I think that's number one. This profession is larger than all of us. Number two, this profession has helped me to feed my family for all these years, sometimes pretty well. It's brought me to places that I never thought I would be. It's exposed me to witnesses, CEOs of major corporations, doctors, and so forth, a variety of people, which has just allowed me to grow. And by growing, I mean to have more information than I would have had without it, so that I can share it with people around me, help them, give it to my 4 sons to help them, and so forth. So when you say, why do I love this career? It's been good to me. It's been good to society. And it's really one to be respected by all of us. And when I realized that, and I started engaging with all the new technology that came along, whether it was as simple as fax machines or as advanced as computerized steno machines, I realized that, you know what, this is something that I really have to give back to. And Laura, that led me to attending conventions. And anybody who's not been to an NCRA convention, you're really missing a treat. Not so much in terms of the seminars that are given, although those are important, but in terms of the camaraderie, in terms of listening to the leaders in our business speak about Guantanamo Bay and other things that they've been involved in. To listen to them is a treat. Also, beyond that, to watch how much they are willing to give of themselves to students, to new reporters, to colleagues around the country. I've watched Ed Varallo, for example, at conventions. I've just stood feet away from him, and overheard conversations that he's had with students, with new reporters, giving advice. You can't get better than Edgar Allo.
Right.
Edgar Allo he's probably the best reporter on planet Earth. And Mark Hislingberry is not very far behind him. And of course, we've got a lot of greats. I'm not comparing one to the other. But what I'm saying is that the greats and the non-greats, any student who goes to a convention will find a welcoming that very few other professions have. So there's an awful lot to be thankful for, to give back, and which form the reasons for why I love this business so very much. Laura?
Speaking of Cicero and giving back, tell us about this new program you've created for students.
For all the years that I've been a reporter, I've heard this mantra expressed by reporters for generations. And the mantra is, there's a big gap between graduating school, reporting school, and knowing what to do on a job well. In other words, there's this vacuum of practical knowledge that some people do approach, some people do it wholeheartedly, some people do it not wholeheartedly, but there's no place where students can go to get learnings, practical, everyday, real-world reporting learnings. And so I decided that I would try to put together a program. What I put together is a program that I call the Cicero Forum, named for the inventor of shorthand, obviously. And it consists, we've been working on it for a year to determine what it should consist of, who we should offer it to. And we're offering it to all students of reporting and through schools primarily. And what it consists of is about 7 different modules. I call them modules, you can think of them as topics. And I'll just give you a brief rundown. One of them is knowledge of the profession, where we describe what freelance is, the different types of freelance reporting, kind of like what I gave you before, talking about how you get paid, the business of reporting, how to maintain your books, how to decide whether to incorporate, and so forth. Another module is at the threshold of reporting. That's what I've called it because it just sounded good at the time. But the idea of that is to give you an attitude, to give students and new reporters an attitude of professionalism that they can carry with them at all times, knowing what to do, what not to do, knowing the advantage of getting to a deposition early, as opposed to walking in when everybody is already seated and then trying to find a seat for yourself. And a whole bunch of things. And most of these modules take several hours. And one more, just to give you this, is what I call professional transcripts. I speak to, in fact, after speaking with you, I'll be talking to a class of perhaps 50 or 60 fifth graders. We have a judge who has students come in to his court once a week. And when they do come in, he speaks to them for about an hour and a half, and then he asks me to come in and talk to them about reporting. And I don't talk to them about reporting the way I would talk to you or to reporters about reporting. I tell them that a reporter does mainly 3 things. 1, we write words. The way we write words is phonetically. That's what they can relate to. 2, we identify speakers. Because as you see in this courtroom in which I give these lectures, we have multiple people who can speak. So we record the words and we indicate who's speaking them. And the 3rd thing that we do, I tell 5th graders, is something that people I work with for years don't realize. And to bring it home to you, I'm going to use an exaggerated example. And so I walk over to the podium in the courtroom and I say, imagine that an attorney is standing here asking questions of the witness who is all the way over there. And he asks this question, did you kill him? And the witness responds, I killed him. And with that pregnant pause, you can see, even in these 5th graders' minds, their eyes starting to roll. And then, of course, I bring home to them the result of that, which is that we also must indicate how things are said by way of punctuation. Every time we put a mark of punctuation in a transcript, it's basically an interpretation of how things were said. So I give them this, and that's really what I think has been helping to to bring a couple of people in. I mean, I've spoken to about 15,000 students in the course of about 10 years. So we've had people come in as a result of that. But the forum goes beyond that. It talks to students who are advanced students, talks to new reporters, and it tries to give you some indications of what it is, what you're going to be faced in the real world to shorten your learning curve. So instead of 18 months or thereabouts to become comfortable with reporting, you probably will only take about 3 months because you won't have remembered everything that we gave you. So that's what that program is about.
That's great. That sounds so needed and so amazing. I do have a question here from a student is, what are your top tips for students on how to pass speed levels? Get past those plateaus that we all hit in court reporting school.
First of all, my suggestion is don't think of them as speed levels. Just be better than you were yesterday. My first suggestion is that you practice every single day as much as you possibly can. If you want to take one day off a week, that's fine. But my respectful suggestion is don't practice today and miss tomorrow. Because when you come back the day after, many times, especially as a student, you have to refine where you were 2 days before. The continuation of doing it every single day is what's very important. The second thing is, don't think about what you have to pass. Make every dictation that you practice from the test. Put yourself in the condition of being nervous, because whatever you do with this next take, even in practice, might be important. In fact, it might be the same take that is used as a test when you get back into school. So respect every moment that you spend. There are ways, structured ways of practicing, and it's hard to do it in this setting, but I'll give you a couple of ideas. I know that all teachers say practice at least X time per day, but very few people give you a way, what you should be practicing. My recommendation, if what you're doing now is not working, if what you're doing now is working, just ignore what I say. But if you need a more constructive way of practicing than you have, overall, remember that you're trying to train your brain, not your fingers. Your brain will tell your fingers what to do. Once you're writing about 140 words a minute, this is something that I heard when I was in school, and this is something that I've recently reconfirmed is so. A person many years ago did an analysis. He compared students writing 140 with speed champion reporters in the same room. He gave them the same take at about 160 words a minute. And he found that the fingers of the students moved faster than the fingers of the experienced reporters. The conclusion was that after about 140 words a minute, you're not getting your fingers to move faster. You're simply striving to eliminate hesitation. So, with that as a background, if your practice sessions are not working, then my suggestion is that you do something different as a focus each day. For example, Monday. Always realize that you have to have time to warm up. For some people, it's 10 minutes. For me, I was very slow. It took me a half hour. So after the first half hour is when I could start building. Mondays, I suggest that you concentrate on straight matter, literaries for the most part. Tuesday, concentrate on something different. For example, jury charge. Wednesday, on testimony. And when you do practice, my respectful suggestion is be nice to your fingers and your brain. Practice at speeds even slower than the last speed that you passed in school. So for argument's sake, if you pass the 160 level, practice at 140. Because just having passed something at 160 doesn't necessarily mean that you're writing majority of takes at 160. You're writing 160 when you can pass, in my opinion, 4 out of 5. So don't forget to go down lower and higher, but spend a lot of time at your general speed with a little bit of a push. We just got you to Wednesday. Thursday, that's your push day. Now you can take a lot of faster material. On the next day, your 6th day, I guess this is, I'm not sure where I've counted to. The next day, I would take what you might get in a test, a straight matter, a jury charge, and a Q&A one after the other. And most important, read back your notes. At least a minute of each take that you got fairly well. The reason is you're teaching your brain. You're not teaching your fingers. Your brain is teaching your fingers. But that's what I suggest most strongly. And the second thing is concentration. Focus and concentration. You might try some focus and concentration exercise, such as something that's in front of you right now. Pick a spot and describe it to yourself. Describe the shape of it, the size of it, the color of it, the texture of it, and keep doing that, talking about that one focus point for at least a minute straight without letting any other thought interfere into your mind. Don't think about where you got it from. Don't think about me. Don't think about Laura, although we always think about Laura. Try not to have any, when you're practicing, when you're taking a dictation, don't evaluate it. Don't say I'm doing terribly. Don't say I'm doing well. Don't say, oh, I heard this before. Nothing. No evaluation. Just work on it. Get from word one to the end word. That's my suggestion.
Great. Those are all great suggestions. Do you still practice every day?
Quite frankly, I don't, because I'm getting old. I'm getting tired, and I have all these projects that I do. So no, I don't practice every day. We are a pretty busy court, and we do have a couple of daily copy and immediate copy cases going. But I'm actually opting out of those cases right now because I'm finishing up the presentation on the Cicero Forum.
Right.
I think next week we'll be announcing it to schools, so I have to devote myself to that as much as possible.
Okay, well, we'll excuse you from practicing then after all this time. I wanted to just maybe end our session talking a little bit about the upcoming Steno Fest, which is an online court reporting seminar, kind of convention type thing, but it's all online, and you are going to be a speaker.
Yes, I am. Mark Greenberg from Oregon, I believe he's from. Mark came up with this idea. He looked at other professions, and many other professions have their conventions online. Not to say they don't also have on-site conventions, but he took a tip from that and he developed, this is the first time it's ever been done, an online, you can think of it as a convention, because in addition to the seminars, the speakers, there are also booths, virtual booths that you can visit. And there'll be, I think, some people are going to be talking about things that they offer, which is interesting. It's kind of like vendor seminars or commercials. But more importantly, what Mark has put together is, for a relatively inexpensive fee, he has put together a group of 17 of us, and he asked me to be the first speaker because obviously I speak about history, and so that's going to be the lead seminar. And Eddie Varallo is not far behind me, as you know, we have some great people, Kislingberry and Melanie Sontag. You've got some wonderful, wonderful speakers. So what I am going to speak about, and I can give you a heads up as to what I'm going to cover. I'm not going to speak about the entire history of reporting. I'm going to speak about the evolution of machine shorthand. And as part of that, I will talk about who first conceived of the idea of mechanizing shorthand. I'll talk about the very first practical machine ever made. Hint, it was not here in America. I will talk about the first computerized writing machine, what it was, why it was, who was involved in it, which is fascinating to me. I will talk about the beginnings of computers, CAT software. I will talk about how our keyboard was invented, why our keyboard is the way it is, and who invented that. I can give you a little hint. It was somebody who studied the English language for 6 years in order to decide how to organize our keyboard, and that keyboard has not varied very much from the time he invented it in, I think it was 1911. Trying to think of what else. You'll find some very funny pictures of machines from the 1800s, machines from around the world, and of course I'll bring it up to date with current machines. So that's what I'll be talking about in that lecture on StenoFest. It's something that I recommend, whether a student or as a reporter. It's something that there's something for everybody. And if you don't have the time to spend in any one day, it is a 2-day event. It'll be recorded so that you can come back at another time and view some of these lectures.
Great. So any other questions for Dom? Just you can go ahead and at this point you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask them if you'd like. Don't be shy. This is your chance. I also,
while you're trying to decide,
yes, go ahead.
Well, I was going to indicate that if you decide that you want to be in touch with me after this, Laura, may I share my email address?
Yes, of course. I will type it in as you say it.
Great. My email address is really pretty simple. I'm anticipating the day that I really can't think too well, which is about 40 years from now. That's about when I'm going to retire again. I've retired twice and have not done very well at it, so I've come back to the business. But my email address, feel free to use it anytime that you have any questions about anything related to reporting. It's my name, Dom Tursi. So it's DOMTURSI at email.com. Yes, email, not Gmail.
Great. And I was just going to say, if you've been watching, you'll see that I have the Gallery of Shorthand website up, and I had the pleasure of visiting there in 2014. And it's when I first walked in, I thought, oh, this is kind of small. It's in a corner of the lobby of the federal courthouse. But I will tell you, I spent about 3 hours there, and I still could have stayed probably 3 more hours. And the time flew by so fast, and I just enjoyed myself so much. So if you ever are there, or I would say make a trip to New York and make sure you get out to Long Island, or I guess it's Islip, to Central Islip to see this amazing, amazing gallery of shorthand with all the information and all the fun things you can see. You can see some of them going by in the pictures right now. There's old machines, new machines, so much information there. And
the machine you're looking at right now is a Chinese machine.
Uh-huh.
And the man in the background picture, the older man, when I'd gone to Beijing as part of a people-to-people trip, I presented him, the inventor of the Chinese machine, with one of our early machines, the Ireland Steno machine, which you'll see in some slides that I show at the StenoFest. Uh-huh. Well, about 2 days later, I got a call from our interpreter that he wanted to present me with his machine. And so the machine that you're looking at right now is the Chinese machine. Yes, it looks very similar to ours. And of course, the Chinese alphabet is so different that obviously it doesn't do very much. But just one more bit of witticism. I was, in the very first day that we were in Beijing, the owner, this man and his son who runs his company, was giving a lecture, a kind of an interview or an introduction of what shorthand is like there in Beijing. And I was in the back. I kind of filtered off from the rest of the group. There were about 40 of us, because I saw a reporter sitting in a chair, quietly writing on this machine, which was placed on her lap. She didn't speak English, nor do I speak Mandarin. And so by gestures, I asked if I could write on it. So she very politely got up from her chair. She bowed to me, presented the steno machine to me, and I sat down in the chair and started monkeying with it. Then she beckoned me to go into an adjoining room, which was kind of a transcription room where they had workstations. She sat me down at a workstation, and at that point, the 40 reporters started filtering into the room behind me. They were all around me. I think one of the photographs that, no, I guess not here. Anyway, so I do have a photograph of all these reporters behind me. And I was writing on their machine, and then I asked for a printout. And so she printed it out and laughed. So whatever I was writing, it was kind of hysterical, or worse, but it was just kind of a fun time.
That's great. What a great story. What great experiences. I really, really, really appreciate your taking the time to talk to us today out here in California, at least some of us. And I look forward to seeing you at the StenoFest. I will certainly be watching. And I hope that you enjoy and motivate those fifth graders to become reporters.
It was my pleasure to be with you. I truly mean it, and thank you, Laura, for all the good that you do for our business. Everybody, good luck to you. Don't feel embarrassed to send me an email about anything at any time. If I can help, I'm more than happy.
Great, thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone.